So now,
a little bit about our story. So there's three stories that we want to tell. One, essentially, our coming to faith, how we got saved, and the details therein. Another about our marriage, our relationship, how we came to come together as partners. And the third story we want to tell is about Messianism, right? The why and how we came to practice Messianic Judaism, what we do here at HOI, and what we come to express here through the Messianic faith. And so a little bit about me. I know I've taught here before, so I've probably shared a little bit about my salvation story, but my background is a Christian believing background. Both of my parents were saved before I was born. And so I grew up in a household that was Christian-based, went to church. My folks were always involved in their ministries, participating and holding different positions in the church they were in. So my exposure as a kid growing up was to the faith, right, to a knowledge and an understanding of relationship with Yeshua, with Jesus, and then seeing how that played out in the context of ministry service, right? And we grew up in the inner city, so there was service ministry that also involved a lot of people who were destitute, poor, a lot of soup kitchen work and things like this. So that really helped me to understand the gospel in context to with the poor and those who are disenfranchised and just on the outskirts of society, right? So that had a big part and parcel in my understanding of God before I got saved in context. But it was funny because in 1987, and I'll never forget, it's one of my earliest memories. In 1987, Ruth Colon, this fireball of a Pentecostal Puerto Rican lady and her husband were leading the Sunday school class for the kids in our church. And she was the first woman who ever gave me my very first Bible and that I had. And I remember doing this like survey. As I recall, it was like a little thing that we had a handout. And one of the questions, as I remember it, was if you died tonight, where would you go? Right? Heaven or hell? And I remember in that class looking at that answer and saying, man, if I died tonight, I'd go to hell. That was my answer. And I remember the kids in the class and the teacher, Ruth Colon, saying, why do you think that? And I said, well, because I'm not a good person. And at 7 years old, I don't really, what could you have done at 7 years old, make you such a terrible person? But I had this awareness, right, in my mind, and I believe a conviction from God that I needed God's help if I was going to change, and that heaven was not a place meant for me without God, right? So then I had my kind of salvation moment, and some of you guys have heard this in, like I said, other teachings, where fast forward to high school, and I was doing some illicit drug use with some buddies of mine on a weekend when his folks were out of town. So we were at his place eating some pizzas and smoking some weed. And, you know, all of a sudden, my mother says, come home quick. One of my good friends who lived in Florida was in town. Surprise, he's at the door. Come back to the house. Everybody's here. His mom, his cousin, him, us. Come on back. And I was in no state to engage anyone. And so I start panicking, I start freaking out, and I pray the one prayer that everybody prays when you're in a situation like that. God, if you get me out of this situation, I promise I'll serve you with my whole life. Amen. Right? And some people pray that just because they don't want to get in trouble. I prayed it because I didn't want to get in trouble. But also, I knew that God was, at that time in my life, trying to get a hold of me, right? And so I think God used the situation to really prompt me into a saving faith, right? So fast, to tell you the end of that story, I go home, I meet up with the buddies outside, you know, we all talked, I got away with it, nobody was the wiser. I get back to my buddy's house, and the Lord just breaks me out in this cold sweat. I mean, sweat, like as if I came out of the shower, right? And I sobered up like this. And I just knew all of a sudden, like, this was God trying to wake me up, right? And that was kind of my salvation moment. It was a watershed moment for me. I came to faith, plugged into a church at the time. I was a hot-headed teenager, so I left the church we were going to and was like, God's not there. I'm going to this church where God is at, right? And I went to this Assemblies of God church, plugged in really fast, got hooked into ministry at an early age, and in February of 1998, I really felt a strong sense that God was calling me into a life of ministry, right? The occupational ministry and more full-time service. That led me to serve in many ways and in many capacities in a lot of different ministries. But I was doing some pastoral ministries in my 20s, and I knew I needed to go to school, Bible college and seminary for now formal training. My serving God in ministry was getting me but so far. But I was running into people who were saying, well, where did you study? Where have you gone to school? And there was a lot of credibility that I was losing because I hadn't studied formally for ministry and for theology and Bible. And so in part and parcel for that reason, I enrolled in college, in a Bible college, and I moved from Jersey to New York. And that's when I entered into the Bible college in Nyack, where I met my beautiful and lovely bride. And so that will get me to my marriage talk. But the interesting piece is, as Natalia and I were talking, is that her salvation experience looks a little bit different. Please, tell us more.
First of all, I didn't do any drugs, so I'm just saying. I'm the good one in the relationship.
All right.
Let me start off by saying that. I did not have that type of salvation story at all. I grew up in a loving Christian household, but I also had family that believed all sorts of things. Let me start off. Grandma was Catholic from mom's side. Grandma from my dad's side was evangelical and kind of on the Pentecostal side. Mom, when I was little, didn't really know the Lord that well. And so I went to 2 different spots depending on which weekend. I did my first communion. I also got baptized. And so my story is just a little bit different. I grew up knowing the Lord. So for me, it was always the challenge for me, and the struggle was always, I guess, the sense of doubt of, hey, am I really saved? Because I didn't have a story like other people had. And so for me, I knew that I had accepted the Lord into my heart, but I also knew that more than just the prayer, it was the life that I was living and the constant asking for forgiveness of whatever sin maybe I had committed. And so I guess that was most of my struggle. Like I said, I did my first communion. I was baptized. I had a bat mitzvah at 16. I will explain more about that later. But I do, for me, the struggle has always been, is my salvation story something to be told? Because I don't feel like it's something that that it was like one moment. For me, it's just kind of been my life. Like I've grown up knowing the Lord. I've struggled, yes, in times of like, am I really saved? Am I not? But I feel like that is normal, especially for people who have grown up in a Christian household. And so that's kind of been my story for salvation.
Yeah, and I was telling Natalia, I said, you got to share a little bit of that piece because I feel like it will resonate here, right? I remember being asked one time, have you ever embellished your testimony? Meaning, have you ever tried to puff it up or make it more than it was? And I think that there's a sort of this temptation, right? This thought that we have to embellish our testimonies to make it some mega transformational, I was all the way in the dark side, and and suddenly came to the Lord and got saved. And maybe, you were living right and doing as best you could. So when you got saved, the trip was short, right? But you still needed God, right? You still needed a saving faith in Yeshua. That's the only way, right? That's the only way. And so when we were talking about this, I feel like
we've had the conversations.
Yeah, I feel like...
What should I say? I don't really know what to say.
Right?
I feel like I've always been saved.
And like, am I nuts here thinking that? But like, some of y'all probably resonate with that, right? Where you're saying, yeah, I don't know. I don't really know when I got saved because I just kind of always believed this, right? And so as we grow in our faith, like every day is a decision, right, for the Lord. Yes, salvation is a momentary thing that is forever sealed, but every day we continue in that choice. So, that was her story, right? And when I met her, the joke with me and the homeboys was, oh man, I'm going to marry a nun, right? Because she was like this little halo, like never messed around, She didn't eat, what does this say? Don't go out with any girls that drink, smoke, or chew, or anything. It was always the case with her. It's like, man, she was a straight arrow. But we knew that going into it. So when we met in Nyack, next slide. Oh, some pictures of us, right, this was me. Believe it or not, this was like right when I got saved-ish. So I was actually a believer in that picture. Hey, right? That's a lot of excitement, right? And that's right, Natalia, that's you about the age that you more or less came to faith. So a little context, right?
That was around the age.
Yeah. So Natalia decided to go to college in Nyack, New York, where I went also for Bible college when I enrolled, like I said, and that's where we met. It was funny because when we first met, there was some mutual friend of ours that came to me and said, man, that girl that was at the table with us the other day, she was really digging you. And I was like, what girl? What are you talking about? I didn't even know who. He described her, and she looked, her hair was this, and she was that, and so on and so forth. I had no clue who she was. Missed it entirely, right? And so it was funny because
I didn't.
She didn't
That's
at all.
why I took the class Romans. Because he was in it.
I was in a Bible class for the book of Romans, and she took it exclusively to sit next to me. So now who was the Holy One? Who was cheating off of my paper? She was. Come on. So I didn't even notice her at first, right? And it was the opposite for her. And maybe that's because at the time I was a little bit older. The age difference with us is 8 years. So at the time I had already, had a history of dating relationships and so forth, and she had not. And so I wasn't there for that. I wasn't going to college to pick up chicks. I was going to college to study, right?
On the contrary, I was. I knew that I was, not to pick up chicks. I was there, obviously for schooling, but I knew, and I wrote it here, my mission was to make sure that I found a spouse. Because on the contrary to Josh, I hadn't really dated anyone. I was very sheltered growing up.
Yeah.
And if anyone knows Miss Maribel, my mother, there was no funny business going on with her. And so she was just very strict. And I knew that when I went off to college, that the growth, both personal and spiritual, that I needed to have had become, that was it. It was stagnant. I needed someone to kind of take me to that next level. And I knew that I needed to find a spouse and that I wanted to get married early because that's one of the things that I had prayed for.
And when I was making plans to come to Bible college, I was prayerfully seeking this. I mean, I was already working in pastoral work in a congregation that was just under 200 people. And so to leave that and go to do this, required some logistics, right, to transition. I had to get some things in order, but it was also a big choice. And the two things that God told me to prompt the move, one of those things was you'll meet your wife. And so, he didn't tell me her name or her background or what she might look like, but I knew that would happen. And it's funny because as we got to know each other, right? So like I said, I didn't notice her at first, and she did. We eventually began to talk, and we were one of those relationships that, like, when we started telling our closest friends, oh yeah, we're dating now, they were like, oh, it's about time, right? Like, everybody else knew that we were a couple before we knew we were a couple, right? So it was funny because in her dorm room at the time, she had a little index card, right? I don't remember if it was 3x5 or 5x8, right? But a little index card on the wall, and it was listing the characteristics of the man that she wanted to marry, right? And I always found that interesting because, you know, growing up in church and ministry world, like, some of the advice you get, right, is, oh, you're a single guy, you're looking for a wife. Well, you need to know what you're looking for, right? So get a piece of paper and write down exactly the kind of wife that you want, right? Write down the list, right? Characteristics and so forth. Be as detailed as you want, you know, hair type, background, so forth. And every time I tried to sit down and do that, and this is a good exercise for all of you to do, don't get me wrong, but every time I tried to sit down, I would just stare at the paper and it would be blank. It'd be blank. And there was a part of me that, like, struggled with the decision because I said, well, I don't want to dictate to God what kind of woman I want, right? God, you tell me what should be on the list. I don't know. And the other part of me, and you'll learn this over time, I do struggle with being definitive about decision making because I can sometimes see all the sides. And so I get paralyzed, right, by the ability to choose between all of them and having good and bad on both. And so my list was always blank. And so I remember seeing hers, and it was robust, right? Even one of them was like, I want a guy that's half Latino and half white.
Yeah.
Like, that was on the list, y'all. Seriously. And here he is, like,
and I guess
white.
for me, it was more so of, we had always lived by faith. And, you know, growing up, inner city, with not a lot of money, my mom had a lot of faith. And so for me, I knew that if I had the faith for, and I could pray for the man that the Lord was going to bring to me, that it would happen. And I had good examples of wonderful men in my life as well as bad examples. And so from there, I basically started listing, okay, Lord, this is what I want. And this is what I don't want. And then I just kind of put it up and left it there. And it's one of the things that at my congregation, our Rebbitzin, you know, would say to us, you write it down, you present it to the Lord, and then you just leave it. And you wait for the Lord to respond. And just be okay with whichever way he does respond. And so for me, it was mostly of that. I did okay, this is what I pray for, and I'm not going to necessarily go out and search everywhere for it. But I'm just going to sit on this and I'm going to wait. Yeah,
for me, I've got, I'll tell you a couple quick stories about the list and the shoebox. The list concluded for me with, I saw hers and it was really kind of, it was a God thing, right? But it was one of those jarring moments where you're like, oh my gosh, she listed exactly like the stuff I'm doing, from like wants to be involved in ministry to, like I said, half Latino, half, you know, white. And it was just so crazy. And my list was blank. And I remember at one moment that she was doing something. Don't ask me what it was. Maybe she was working with kids or doing something else or whatever it was. But I remember, like, the Lord just kind of clicked the light bulb. And I looked, and what she was doing, I was like, ooh, I want that on my list. And so from that point on, I started to observe or see things that she was doing or saying or how she would interact. And I was like, ooh, yeah, I want that on the list. And so the list started to form based on what I was seeing in her and seeing from her. And so my list, you know, ultimately wound up forming out in much the same way when it was concluded. But I watched the Lord kind of open my eyes to characteristics that were good for me, he had for me, and that I would enjoy. So a funny story, I'll tell you about the shoebox. You remember the shoebox? Yeah, she remembers the shoebox. And this was no small shoebox. Like, we're not talking little, you know, flip-flops for the beach. This was like high-top Nike shoebox big. And it was a shoebox that I kept for years. I kept every note every picture. Now again, I'm old enough to predate kind of all the social media and everything being digitized, but I kept every picture, every note, every little trinket, every friendship bracelet for every girl that ever even paid me attention or I had a relationship with ever.
I was like, oh, dang.
Like ever. Right? So there were pictures of all kinds of stuff. There was little notes that, like I said, there was little bracelets or a ring or a dried up flower that you sprayed with hairspray to preserve it. Right? Everything was in this box. And it was Josh Ortiz's box of relationship girl history. Right? And we weren't even engaged yet. Look at her face, even retelling this. You see that face right there, y'all? You see that face? She's like, you in that box, right? And I kept this. And it was my way to really hang on to the past. And we weren't engaged yet, but I had brought her, I think it was to the first time you came to Thanksgiving at my house with my family. And I brought her upstairs and I said, I need to give you this box, and you need to be the one that throws it out. I knew it was a watershed moment in our relationship that the Lord was having me to do to put to rest, like to close a chapter on that part of my life. And I gave her the shoebox and I said, you can open it. You can look through everything. You can ask me about anything that's in it. I'm 100% transparent. But when you're done, you close it, you throw it away. You need to throw it away. And she looked at me and she said, okay. I said, do you want to open it? She said, nope. She just walked to the garbage and threw it away. And that was a very telling moment in our relationship for probably two reasons, and you can speak to this if you want to, but I remember one was, what's to know? I mean, what's the need for opening it on some level, right? This is our relationship, and here we go, moving forward. And the other thing was, you shared with me later, that had she opened it, it would have unlocked a Pandora's box of insecurity.
Which is what I'm very confident in some areas, but opening it would have definitely, because of certain dad issues, it would have opened different insecurities and would have started just an ugly path for us.
Yeah, I remember it was much later in our relationship. We were married, I think, at that point, and you came across through some way an ex-girlfriend, and she was like, she's so pretty. Are you still interested in her? Do you want to leave me for her? And it became this thing. And I didn't want to, at first, a younger me, early in marriage, was like, psh, get over it. I'm married to you. Hello, right? But I had to really, pump the brakes and say, this is a legit both insecurity and concern, and I need to handle this like a man and say, yo, it's over. And do everything I could to ensure the security of the relationship, right? One of the things, I'll tell you this, that I did when we were dating, were we dating or engaged? I think we were engaged or dating, was for one whole year, we did each month anniversary, right? I don't know, y'all might be too young, some of you, to know couples that go, it's our 3.5 month anniversary, he got me flowers, right? Something like this. And so it wasn't to be cheesy, it's that I knew that this was where the Lord took, I had my parents who were 40 plus years married, my grandparents, my mom's mom and dad, who were 60 plus years married, and so I came from kind of a pedigree of strong, long-lasting relationships. My wife's experience was exactly the opposite, right? Mom and dad were divorced, all the siblings wound up having divorce, and the ones who were together, their marriages was hot mess, right? And so it was.
Mind you, I was in counseling.
Oh yeah.
During that
counseling
time,
for a lot of that.
While being at school, if your college offers free counseling, please take it. I took it for 3 years. I loved it. They would have offered it for more. I would have still been there, working on all of my dad issues. And that year was exactly it was just during that time. And it was good to be able to speak to someone else about what was going on internally, because now I'm officially dating someone for the first time ever, and all this ugliness that I thought I didn't have was starting to come up, and it just was stirring so many different emotions inside of me that I just didn't know how to handle otherwise. And so this 1 month anniversary thing that we were doing was just kind of it was helping with my healing process in a way without even realizing it.
Yeah, and I would do we were college and broke, so like I would do something cheesy like, a photo montage and like that you can hang in your dorm or something, and it was just memories of us or whatever kind of thing. And we go out to dinner or whatever it was each month to say, look, I'm not going anywhere and this relationship's going to last. I know that's not your experience, and I know that rattles your cage a bit, but I'm here to stay. And so, I felt like it produced a lot of strength in our relationship together with the counseling. Listen, if y'all don't know it yet, when you're in a relationship with somebody, or a romantic relationship with somebody, when it gets ugly, you're going to be the first one to get hit and the hardest because you're that close and hopefully you're that open with each other. But yeah, we put in a lot of effort to get through that.
And that goes through like my bullet with this one is growth and struggle. Being married was definitely my next step in growing spiritually, mentally, in all sorts of ways. But it was also such a huge struggle. After my own personal counseling, we then went to marriage counseling for 3 years because it was just very difficult. Josh is very much of a gray, he thinks outside the box. He, is very on the gray scale.
What was our trivia question? What rules? Right?
I'm the opposite. Mm-hmm. I'm black and white. And so for me, if it's no and it's very much next to the line, then it's a no. Absolutely not. And so we just thought very differently. And I then started to doubt the reasons why I got married. And was it to get out of my house? And so all of this just ugliness started to just come up, and it was hard, and it was, I think, why we waited so long to have kids.
Oh yeah, we were a mess. If we would have had Shiloh in like year 1 or 2, we'd have 3 people. That's a hot mess. No. So the Lord did it in His time, I think.
12 years later. So all to say, it took a lot of counseling, and the key was definitely prayer. Tons and tons of prayer. I mean, I can't say that you're ever done growing.
No, hopefully not. Till you meet the Lord, you're always growing.
But it's definitely a work in progress, and we've learned how to communicate. Because even though I thought I was very clear, it felt like sometimes I was speaking a completely different language.
Yeah. And that goes with any relationship too. So for the sake of time, you will transition to the latter. Allie, I know you really want to hear the how he proposed story. Shut up, Siri. The how he proposed story, and we can tell that in a minute. But let's jump to the Messianic. Let's jump to the Messianic thing. How we became to practice Messianism. So we got married. Fast forward several years after that, we completed our undergrad and graduate degrees in New York, and then came down to Charlotte. We knew we wanted to move from New York, but we didn't know where. And we were kind of prayerfully seeking out different big cities, right? Neither of us are particularly like country folk, so we were looking for like a city that would do well for us to grow together, grow a family, right? Carve out a little bit of space. And Charlotte was good because Nati has a ton of family down here, so it was very helpful for us to come to a new place we didn't know, excuse me, and get a lot of help to get settled, right? And so we came down here when we were dating and engaged. I came down for New Year's a lot. We would do Christmas with my family, who celebrated Christmas, and then New Year's with her family, who did New Year's really big. And when we would come down, we said, well, if we're looking at Charlotte, for the future, let's see what they got by way of like Messianic fellowships. We had been a part of a fellowship on Long Island, and now we wanted to continue down here in Charlotte. So let's take a look. And we found HOI. How I came to Messianism more or less was biblical professional curiosity, right? Like, how can I read this Bible and study this faith that's inherently Jewish, and I don't, in most of my experience, feel like there's any Jewishness in it, right? So it was kind of this cerebral, professional, and ministerial push for it. But then there was also like a personal piece when I met her rabbi. This guy was, you know those people that like that you meet and you just want to hug them. You're like, man, they're just like a giant teddy bear. Like, you know some of those like big teddy bear people, right? This was that guy. He was the best. And he took the faith and he made it personal and he made it intimate in ways that for her served as like kind of a dad figure, and for me helped to personalize this Messianic practice that the Messianic Jews I was exposed to before I met her and that fellowship and that community, they were all crazy. I was like, if that's Messianic Judaism, I don't want to know nothing about it because y'all are nuts. Nuts. And I was really glad to meet some down-to-earth folks who loved the Lord and did it in a way that was, I think, very close to the scriptures as we understand the Messianic expression, right? So that's when we came down here. We plugged into HOI, and we've served, I guess, ever since. That's my 2 cents on it. Natty's got a little bit different story about it.
So it is true what it says there. It all started for me with a very long bus ride. So like I said, I grew up knowing about the Lord from a very young age. But then my parents separated when I was 12. And that's kind of Natty's, or my exodus, because everything happened at the age of 12 for me. Everything major. So my mom was searching for more. She knew there was more. She was reading the scripture a lot. She kept praying. And all of a sudden, one day on the street, she met a friend she hadn't seen in a very long time. And this friend started telling her about this synagogue, Messianic synagogue she was going to. So one Saturday morning, she decided to take my mom. My mom was like, this is the place for me. This is what I've been searching for. This is the Lord. The Lord has answered my prayer. Well, now she had to come and tell both of her kids, hey, we're going to go find the synagogue that someone drove me to. So
don't forget, her mom didn't drive. New York only take buses and trains.
And the synagogue is in Long Island. And so one train, and about an hour and a half bus ride, and we could not find the synagogue. And she was like, I think it's around here. It's on a corner somewhere. My brother Julio and I, of course, were like normal 6-year-old and 12-year-old. Seriously, Mom? Like, come on. So after 3 Saturdays of that, her friend finally took us by car. And then that's kind of where everything started just going very quickly. We were definitely leaving Egypt for sure. We left Queens quickly within about a month. We moved to Long Island to my uncle's house where he had 3 kids. We lived in their basement. And that's when I felt like the Lord began to work and chip away at parts that I didn't even realize I needed work in. I think that they were so confounded that it just, and it began experiencing itself in different ways. So at the age of 12, I also became epileptic. And all of a sudden, I started having seizures at night. So I would go to sleep and wake up on the floor, and my mom shaking me, and it just, we would go to the doctor, and the doctor would say, well, you just need to eat well, or you need to sleep, or you can't be stressed. And inside, I kept thinking, I'm stressed by school, I'm stressed by my parents' relationship, I'm stressed that we just moved to a Messianic congregation where they sing in Hebrew, and I have no idea what they're saying, and it's weird, and the kids are weird, and I'm used to like the street and being able to go out whenever I wanted to, and here I am in like a suburban area with a lot of white folks who don't understand me, or the way that I dress is definitely different, and so everything just started to change. But even though the change was hard, the change was also to make me better, if that makes sense. So, yes, the Lord began to work through me on the years of like dad abandonment, and my faith began to grow. So that's why I say I don't have as much of a huge salvation story, but just my life and my path and the way the Lord has just sheltered me and taken care of me and taught me has just been different. And then I began to go with the youth on retreats and to Messianic conference, and I saw other people believing the same thing, and then it just opened up my world. And that's exactly why I went to Naya College, because my rabbi taught there. And then I met Josh, and so it's just been, even though it's been hard to follow the Lord, I've always known that there is no better path. It's hard, but it's worth it.
It's funny because like the last little piece on talking about Messianic or marriage was hard work, right? Staying together takes a commitment to hard work, It may not always be impossibly difficult feeling, but you have to be committed to doing the work, right? To stay in a relationship. And honestly, that's not untrue of our faith, right? That's not untrue of our faith with God. Like Yeshua says, come to me all who are weak and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. My burden is light, my yoke is easy. I mean, it doesn't mean there's no burden and no yoke put on your shoulders, right? But there's an ease to it that's distinct and different from the world, but it still takes work. It still takes work. It takes work to stay together. It takes work and a commitment to that, an investment to that, to invest even in the Lord, right? Like everything that Natalia is saying is talking about her relationship with the Lord, and probably her relationship with me, because that takes a lot of work too. And but the commitment to that, and to stay true to that, no matter what, come storms or anything else, is a principle that I think has kept us together. Clearly, as you've heard, it's kept her, close to God in her relationship. And me, at another talk, maybe I'll share about when I even had my own doubts, like you, saying, is this salvation thing even real? Does God even love me anymore? I mean, these are real crisis moments that we'll have periodically in our life. And then when we turn to God, He will bring us out of that. So, for the sake of time, if you have any more questions for us, we would love to share more. But there is next week, and we're going to hear more about more of the leadership and some of what we're talking about here next week. So hopefully these nuggets were a little good for you. They resonate somewhat with y'all, and I'm sure that God will use it. I thank you guys for listening. Let's pray and get to it. Father, I thank you for this time, and I pray that what has come forward by way of our stories and reflections, Lord, would land on good soil and resonate with every heart here, that one day if they find themselves in the same position, they would know who they can talk to and who they can turn to. You first, us next. We pray, God, that you would take everything that's come forward and you would bless it with your Holy Spirit to provide increasing growth in every life. In Yeshua's name, amen. Amen.